Welcome to PsychSessions AI, a podcast dedicated to discussing the impacts of AI on the field of psychology. My name is Joe Slade, and I study AI teaching and learning at Oregon State University. Let's dive in. Welcome, everybody, to our next episode of PsychSessions, where we are joined by David Wiley. David is a co-founder and chief academic officer of Lumen Learning, as well as director of the Brad D. Smith Student Incubator at Marshall University. David, welcome.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, David and I have been in kind of some AI-related conversations over the months. I don't know how long we've kind of known each other. I actually don't know the story of how did Lumen get started? What did you start off as an instructor and then start kind of writing kind of books more and then tending toward that route? What's that story?
Gosh, what's the shortest possible version of that story? So I got involved in before we called it OER back in the late 1990s, we called it open content. And so back in the 90s, I created. This is years before Creative Commons or anything like that, but created the first open license for non-software content. There was, open source software was a thing, free software was a thing, and I thought we should be doing this for other things too, not just software. We should do it for textbooks and journal articles and essays and photographs and things like that. So in the late 90s, I started advocating for that idea. And in 2000, finished my PhD in instructional psychology and technology at BYU, which is kind of an ed tech degree, and took a postdoc at Utah State, and then joined the faculty there in their instructional technology department. And for many years, from 2001 until we started Lumen at the end of 2012, really the bulk of my research was around what we called open content, and then came to be called open educational resources later. First, advocating for that idea that when we share with each other, the whole universe won't come to an end. There's this idea in the early 2000s that if you put something on the internet educational and it's free, people will stop coming to the university. They, we'll all go out of business, and there's all this kind of fear and uncertainty and doubt about the impact that open would have. But so kind of worked through an advocacy period, and then we started writing some software in my center, the Center for Open and Sustainable Learning at Utah State, to make it easier for people to share OER with each other. And near the ends of the 2000s, it became clear that there were a lot of people who were creating OER, but nobody was using OER. So you had these big collections like MIT OpenCourseware, and they had lots of students accessing their material directly, but faculty just weren't adopting those materials in a way that were saving students money or changing their outcomes. And so my friend Kim Thanos, who's my co-founder at Lumen, and I started doing some work that was funded by the Gates Foundation. And we wrote this grant proposal where we said, we swear we will not spend any money creating new OER. We're only going to work to support faculty adopting OER that already exist. And so with a collection of 8 institutions across the country over the period of a grant, helped 10 faculty kind of stop assigning the proprietary materials they'd been assigning before and start assigning OER as the required textbooks in their courses. And then at the end of that grant, Gates came back and said, this work seems really promising. If you had another grant, would you do more? Would you be willing to do more of the same kind of the work if there was another phase of funding? And we kind of talked to each other. I was working full-time as a faculty member and doing this grant project kind of on the side, and she had her own business that she was doing. But with the promise of some initial funding from Gates, we both quit our jobs and started trying to take this work of helping people adopt OER at scale, started trying to figure out how to really make that happen. And that's the beginning of Lumen Learning. That's fall of October 2012. We said, we're going to do this. And then I took a 1-year leave of absence at the beginning of 2013 because, we didn't know if it was going to quote unquote work or not.
Hmm.
And, coming back to it, having the security of being able to come back to a faculty job if things blew up, made it a lot easier to, lowered the risk a lot. But things have been going really well at Lumen. We're, what are we, almost 12 years old now, and this year will help somewhere between 350 and 400,000 students, whose faculty will assign OER that we will provide to them through our systems and with our kind of value added wrap around, to them as their required course materials. So it's been kind of an interesting journey, but that's the short-ish version of it. It wasn't super short, but that's kind of how it started.
Huh. So what does the kind of the OER landscape look like today? About how many instructors are adopting those kind of materials over the traditional textbooks?
Like nationwide?
Yeah, I'd be curious.
Oh,
Is it growing as much as I hear? Like anecdotally, I hear a lot more people kind of turning to that, but I don't have any numbers or.
yeah, it's been a while since I've seen a number. I think 2023 was the last time I saw a number, and I think the number was somewhere like 35 to 40% of like general education kind of courses in US higher ed had moved to OER.
That's
The numbers in
huge.
K-12 are different and are harder to track, and the numbers in the upper level courses at university level are there just aren't as much OER available at those higher levels as there are, for intro to anything, intro to business, intro to psych, intro to, bio for non-majors. That catalog is covered pretty well with OER, and there's some pretty good options. So, some are a third, 40% maybe of courses around the country are using OER as their required course materials in that kind of band of courses.
That is really big. Is that like a chief concern of big textbook companies these days? Is if the OER market keeps growing?
I think that used to be a chief concern of big publishers, but I think now everybody's just worried about whether higher education is going to continue to exist it
Yeah.
into the future, given the way that things are going in the broader environment. You've got enrollment trends that everyone is swimming upstream against, institutions that are closing because they run out of budget because they don't have the enrollments to support what's happening there, and institutions that aren't completely closing or closing programs, letting tenured faculty go. Today, there's supposed to be an executive order of some kind issued that's going to further the work of closing the Department of Education. So I think big textbook publishers are more worried about how big is the market going to be a year from now, 2 years from now. I think OER has fallen down the list of their concerns a
Huh.
little bit, given some of the other things that are happening in the ecosystem.
Hmm. I mean, you've been around in higher education for a while. Is this kind of threat, does it feel new or does it just feel kind of like there's always some kind of threat? Because like you mentioned, when OER first came out, people were saying maybe that's going to be the end of higher ed.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, when I was around when the internet first came to universities and kind of lived through that transition. I was actually the first university webmaster at Marshall University back in the day, and so um, saw that transition really up close. Nobody knew how important the webmaster was and where they fit into the hierarchy of things, and so um, early on, I shared an office and a secretary with the CIO,
Hmm.
and Um, as in my role as the webmaster, I chaired the committee that set things like intellectual property policy around online courses. Like anything to do with online, the webmaster was either right in the middle of or was the chair of. And so I had the opportunity to watch that in the mid 90s, kind of play out, at least here in West Virginia. And, everybody was worried that the internet just there's going to be so much cheating, there's going to be so much plagiarism, there's going to be, this, that, and the other. There was a whole kind of industry of kind of doom forecasting about the impact of the internet back in the 90s. And maybe we'll come back around to this, but I think it's a lot of the same if you look at the labels and the kind of top level explanations of the concerns, a lot of the concerns you hear about the impact of AI on
Just
education
thinking
are
that.
the same ones that people were worried about, 25, 30 years ago as the internet started to make its way into higher education. So it seems like there always is something that we're concerned about. It was the internet first. OER obviously has had a much smaller impact on things than the internet did. AI's poised to have a pretty big impact. But the stuff going on in the broader ecosystem, um, I don't know that it's scarier than COVID was. I
Hmm.
mean, COVID was hard, right?
Yeah.
Nobody was prepared for that. It just seemed to drop out of nowhere, and it kind of feels like I guess it kind of feels like COVID again in terms of kind of the level of concern for what's happening and where things are heading and when they might start to get better, or do they keep getting worse, or it just all those unanswered questions. I think in a lot of ways it is kind of similar to COVID today.
Hmm. Maybe we can go back to those concerns that you had about when like the internet was first getting big and how they kind of parallel, like you said, a lot exactly as you were describing some of the concerns that people were worried about, plagiarism and those kinds of things. You hear that all the time with AI. How were they resolved back when the internet came out? How were those challenges met?
Yeah, I think they were. I think to some extent they turned out to be true. It certainly is easier to plagiarize now than it was before the internet. Before the internet, you had a maybe you lived in a frat house and there's a filing cabinet in the back that had old exams, that somebody had managed to sneak off with or something. So, it's not that it was anything new, but it certainly allowed it at a completely different scale than it had been possible before.
Yeah.
Right. And scale really matters because you can say, well, it's the same thing just at a different scale, but at some point it becomes a qualitatively different beast. Um, Once it starts to become so easy and so widespread and get to scale. So, I mean, in some ways, the internet did mean that there was more cheating happening. Um, but over the years, um, you know, we we've come up with some solutions. I don't know that they're great. Um, I'm really not a fan of kind of surveillance assessment technologies, browser lockdowns and show me the
Mhm.
bedroom that you're sitting in, and I'm going to monitor your facial expressions and track your eyes. And I think that's just kind of over the top. Um, well, and more than just over the top, but let's just leave that there.
Mhm.
But people have developed, a range of different strategies for how they've tried to deal with cheating. But I think it is interesting that in almost every case, the solutions to the problem are at least as bad as the problem that they're trying to combat. So these
Mhm.
surveillance-based assessment integrity systems, I think, are highly problematic for privacy and a range of other reasons. Things like Turnitin, where
Mhm.
you force students to give over their IP to this company, right? As the creator of an essay, I own the copyright in that. And now you're going to force me to provide a copy of my own copyrighted work to this company that's going to make their own copy of it and weaponize it against me and other students. Like,
Mhm.
that's terrible. I don't know. It seems like all the solutions come with almost as many problems as the problem that they're trying to solve. And it seems, but here we are 25 years later, and things seem to still be going pretty okay.
Mhm.
So the idea that the internet was going to destroy the university and nobody would come to school anymore because we'd just be downloading free things off the internet and talking in chat rooms to get our questions answered or something. None of those predictions really came to pass. So I think it's just kind of patience and trying to be creative and work your way forward. And um, a lot of good things have happened as a result of the internet kind of combining with education. And we don't stop to talk about those as frequently, but the internet just has a number of affordances that a physical classroom does not, and creates all kinds of opportunities for new forms of teaching and learning. And so I guess it's partly a matter of where you choose to put your focus. If you're going to kind of worry about the negative part of it with the majority of your energy, or spend the majority of your energy thinking, wow, I have access to all these new affordances now. What better ways could teaching happen? What more effective ways could learning happen? How can I leverage this in the service of this work that I'm trying to do? Um, and, just reflecting on it just now, I don't know that I've ever really thought deeply about this, and I still haven't, but I'll say it anyway, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't think I know anyone who is really deeply in both of those camps.
Hmm.
Like I know some people who are really interested in kind of understanding the affordances and pushing forward and how can we do more, better, more broad, more scaled, more equitable teaching and learning using these tools. And I know people who have really doomsday feelings about them, but I don't think I know anybody that has both of those feelings about them.
Hmm.
It seems to sort people into camps almost.
Maybe even self-selecting, like you say, there are little sort of cottage industries for each. Like you'll
Hmm.
have like an outlet that it's just like the doom and gloom outlet, or this outlet that's just completely hopeful. I find that interesting in my own work because I tend to fall on the hopeful side, just
Hmm.
because it's so cool. Like you say, there are so many different affordances that you could never consider before. The fact that you can have a conversation with a machine at any time that resembles the conversations that you'd have with a person. I mean, like the teaching potential for that is huge. Um, but yeah, how do you kind of factor in the fact that there will be more cheating? The fact that it is so easy. I mean, like that line is getting so blurry because all you
Yeah.
have to do is ask, "Hey, can you help me with this sentence? Can you help me with this paragraph?" And instantly you have something that's kind of yours. Is that yours? I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah. This, well, I can talk to you about Vygotsky. We can talk about Vygotsky on this podcast, right?
Oh
People
yeah.
know, people here will know who Vygotsky is. Um, I think so. Two things. First, I think the idea of, um, the framing of the zone of proximal development is that it's this space of things that you're kind of able to do with the assistance of this more capable peer, right?
Mhm.
And so when you frame the AI as the more capable peer, then what does that do to the size of that zone? Things you could never do on your own, but now you can do with assistance. Um, I think thinking about the AI as that more capable peer from that perspective is um, a very different framing and helps you think about possibilities in different ways than you would otherwise. And also just the idea of kind of language as this the mediational means through which we think and work and act, and the central role of language. Large language models are all about language, right? So I think there are some interesting opportunities there as well. Uh, James Wirch, do you know James Wirch and his work? He's a um, I'm looking at the bookshelf behind me here. I'll never be able to find it in time, but um, has written about tools and the mediational role of tools and language, and is very heavily influenced by Vygotsky. Maybe even did some Vygotsky translating. I don't think that's right. Um, anyway, I remember in one of his books reading this example of, and it's just this quintessential example of the argument over the role of tools in our lives and in performance. So he's talking about the history of high jumping as a sport. And as he tells the story, high jumping began as people actually jumping for length, not for height, jumping across small creeks and things like that, and using a hard wooden stick. And at some point, somehow it transitioned to jumping for height, the way that we know about high jumping today. And then at some point, this transition began from the hard wooden sticks to the fiberglass poles that jumpers use today. And that fiberglass will bend, and kind of there's some spring that's involved in the fiberglass. And so, of course, the kind of diehard orthodox high jumping community was like, when you use that fiberglass pole, it does all the work. You just hold on to it and it just throws you over. There's nothing to it anymore. It's not even the same sport, et cetera, et cetera. And you just see that in so many different places, in so many different ways, right? With arguments about calculators or whatever it might be. When technology comes along, it tends to have this capability to increase our performance, right? And
You need only ask them, like, well, you go do a high jump then. You
yeah,
show me.
Here's
Show
a
me how much.
here's a fiberglass pole. Let it throw you over. Let it throw you over, right? Or here's a calculator. Go ahead and calculate that derivative for me because the calculator does all the work. Here it is. Go ahead. These arguments are kind of, when you get to the bottom of them, they're sort of nonsensical, right? Because obviously the pole doesn't do all the work. The calculator doesn't do all the work. You have to learn how to use the tool effectively, which is a kind of learning in and of itself. I think we think about that as a second class kind of learning, but learning to be fluent and capable with the tools of the trade seems like it ought to be a first class kind of learning that we really care about. And the idea that there's something more moral or virtuous or righteous about doing the work without technology than there is in doing it with the assistance of some kind of technology is confusing to me.
It's big though. Like,
it's very big.
Yeah, I feel a little bit of that in my heart. Like if I were to compare, like an AI generated essay versus something that I know that just a human typed, like an animal on their own. For some reason, I do value it a little more. I'm not even now. I'm a little unconscious as to why that must be.
It's so interesting, right? It gets to the purpose of, or what you as the, let's just say reader, and use that word to mean the consumer of any type of thing that's been created by someone else. But you as the reader, what is it that you, what's the purpose of that artifact, and what do you want your relationship to it to be? Right? If it's chapter 1 of an open textbook on introduction to psychology, and if my goal of interacting with that artifact is to learn all the things I know to pass my exam and be able to do my homework and whatever else, then why would I care if it was, if 90% of the words in it were written by an AI versus written by a human being versus something else? But I don't know if I'm engaging with the work because I feel like it's a way that engaging with the work is a kind of way of engaging with the author, right? Like maybe I would experience a piece of poetry or a piece of music or something like that. Then I can start to see that starts to feel kind of weird because the artifact is kind of mediating this relationship between you and this author, even though you never meet them, you never talk to them, but you feel like you're having this kind of conversation kind of across the ages or across time, or you're in this dialectic relationship with them. If that's what you think that interaction is about, then I understand, how AI being an author becomes kind of weird. But a lot of the things in our day to day, we're trying to learn what we need to learn in order to do some task, right? How in Python do I do, whatever it is, how do I calculate a regression in Python again? I go look it up and I find the sample code or the explanation that I need in the documentation. I don't care if the documentation was written by a human or by an AI. I'm just trying to find what I need to get my task done and get on with the rest of my day. And for better or worse, I think most students have that same kind of transactional relationship with the educational materials that they study from. They're not, maybe if you're in a literature course or some humanities course where there's an author and it's a work of art and you're trying to get to know the author better by experiencing their art. I mean, maybe that's different, but
why is that different? Like, I'm even thinking like reading Ernest Hemingway versus reading the work of somebody who prompted ChatGPT to speak in the language of Ernest Hemingway and tell a story. And if you in a blind taste test couldn't tell the difference, why should you feel cheated when maybe you were just trying to reveal something that you were learning about yourself. Like maybe it's less about the communication with the author and more about whatever insight you derive. But why is that so hard for us to like accept?
I don't know. I mean, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think the purpose with which you approach the work makes all the difference, right? If you just want to be
Mhm.
entertained, if you're trying to discover something about yourself, if you're looking something up in reference material, there's a whole range of ways that you would interact with some created artifact that I don't know why you would feel any differently finding out that it was one or the other. Um, and I don't. I don't have that issue. And and I'm trying to work hard to see it from that other perspective, and because I know a lot of people do have it, and I want to understand that and be able to relate to it, and um, not be rude or
Because it's
insensitive
scary
to
to most
people's
people, I
concerns.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll admit that for the vast majority of use cases, that's for whatever reason I don't have that issue. Um, Now, if I want to think about a part of my life where that would be an issue, um, like crossing over into the religious part of my life, like when I read scripture, I read that for a very different reason. I feel like it comes from a different place. My engagement with it serves a different kind of purpose. If it turned out that the entire New Testament had been written by AI, then that would be problematic in a way that would be different from, say, finding out that your sociology textbook had been written by AI. So I guess even in my life there are some parts of it where it would make a difference, but but in most of my life it really doesn't for me.
I forget where it is. I don't remember if it's like a Norwegian country or if it's like Switzerland, but there's a church over in Europe where they
Mhm.
have one of the confessional booths set with like a live avatar of Jesus. And then, of course, exactly, like an open AI API kind of voice to voice exchange. So you can sit there in a confessional booth and talk to Jesus, quote unquote. Like,
I,
what kind of feelings does that arouse?
I will say one of my favorite things about using AI personally when I use it is that I can be a little slow sometimes. And in a conversation in which, if I were having it with a human being, I just get embarrassed by still, after the third explanation, not understanding it. I would probably just pretend to understand it and go on not understanding it because I was too embarrassed to admit to the person I was talking to, I know you're explaining it very clearly, but somehow I am just not capable of
Yeah.
getting what you're trying to tell me. And there's just some social pressure to not seem like an idiot. The thing I just love about talking to AI about, especially about new topics or things that I used to know that I've forgotten, is I have zero sense of embarrassment. Right? I can ask 20 times, I can ask 30 times. It doesn't care. It's just going to keep answering until it finally, it's going to keep digging until it strikes gold and I'm able to understand. And those being able to have those kinds of interactions in a way that's free of judgment,
Mhm.
I think is super powerful. Um, I can imagine it being easier to quote unquote confess my sins to an AI maybe than it would be to a person who I've known for a long time and respect and whose opinion of me matters. But I don't think I would get the same thing out of that conversation that I would having it with the human being, right?
I haven't grown up Catholic myself and gone to many a confession. Like, so much of it depends on the priest. Because I mean, like you can sit there and you can be bearing your soul, and he's like, "Yep, 10 Hail Marys and Our Father, and you're fine." And then another person will, engage with you and say,
Yeah.
"Why do you think you're doing this?" Which is probably ultimately part of the purpose of
That's
something
what
like
you
a
want, right? You just
confession.
want that
Yeah.
help growing and overcoming. And yeah, it's just a different kind of learning and it's a different kind of instruction, but it's still about learning and growth. Yeah.
Hmm. That is interesting about that. I've thought about that shame aspect, like in the clinical setting. Like
Hmm.
sometimes you could be sitting there with a therapist and Maybe you worry about what the therapist is thinking about you more than you want to grow by being completely honest about what's going on in your mind. And when there's that tension, I don't know, maybe that's another growth experience that you're supposed to have, but sometimes it is maybe easier to bare your soul to a bot.
I mean, sometimes we in assessment we talk about construct irrelevant sources of difficulty.
Mm,
Right. So maybe the reason I'm struggling with this word problem in math isn't that I don't know the math inside and out. It's that I don't know the vocabulary of the word problem. And so you think you're giving me a math test, but actually you're testing my English. And it, the result of that assessment, when you sit down to look at my understanding of math, your measure is going to be wrong because there was this construct irrelevant source of difficulty in the item. It's do we want students to have good English? Do we want them to be able to understand word problems? Yes, yeah, all those things. But normally when we sit down to try to assess something, we're typically pretty targeted in that, and we're trying to, does Joe understand this thing or not? I don't know. I'm sure that learning how to open up yourself and talk to another human being is a skill that we want everyone to have. But should that skill interfere with your ability to make the progress you need to make on the issues? Because I don't know, is that a construct irrelevant source of difficulty in that kind of growth trajectory or learning trajectory for that person? I don't know. It's hard to pull. Well, at least historically,
mhm,
it's been hard or difficult to pull those apart from each other.
mhm.
Right. So now when you think about the affordances of AI, maybe being able to pull those apart is possible now in a way that it wasn't before, that you could have part of that conversation at least where you share the things that are the most embarrassing or that you're the most worried about how they would affect that other person's opinion with you. Maybe you can have some of that conversation with a bot in preparation to go, before you go in and have a longer conversation with a human being, right?
I was just thinking that like a warm up. You're sitting there in the waiting room chatting with the bot, and it's asking you, these deeply intimate personal questions, and maybe that warms you up for going in.
Yeah, as long as that model is running locally on device
Yeah.
and all your responses aren't going up into the cloud.
Or at least on a local server, and then a summary is printed out for the the therapist.
Exactly.
Huh.
Oh
Well,
my
let's
goodness.
let's maybe pivot back to more AI and education kind of
Yeah,
topics.
sorry, I
Where
led us down the path for a minute there.
Sorry, there's no sorry. This is this is all fun. Uh, where do you see things going these days? I mean, you're sitting there, co-head of a textbook company. You're big in AI. You're publishing on LinkedIn all the time. I know you're
Mhm.
leading a lot of workshops with faculty members about, incorporating AI
Uh,
into the classroom and into their workflows. Where do you see where do you see growth? Where do you see what are you most excited about?
I think you might have heard it's become popular to say that you won't be replaced by AI, but you'll be replaced by a person who knows how to use AI effectively. Um, I think it's really becoming um, this. We're entering an era where people who have had the opportunity to study and learn and understand something about how humans learn, what types of teaching are more effective than others, what types of study habits are more effective than others, like really understanding those things is about to matter a lot more than it has in the past. I think the thing that's most exciting to me about AI in education is being able to um, implement evidence-based practices at a scale that we haven't been able to implement them before. When I was a grad student, one of my faculty used to talk about productization. And the way he would explain this idea of productizing something is maybe you learn something new in your research and it's moderately technical and it would take quite a bit of training of teachers or of instructors to help them understand that thing well enough to implement it and benefit their students in the classroom. But if you could take that insight and you could embody it in a product that a person who knew nothing about what was going on inside could still gain all the benefit from, then you have an opportunity to really bless the lives of a lot of people.
Hmm.
Right? Because most people are never going to get into the research far enough to understand all the things they need to understand to kind of roll their own and benefit from it themselves. So, like a great example of this, I think, is with cell phones from 3G to 4G to 5G. Like, how much do you personally understand about the difference between 5G and 4G?
Mhm.
Like
Just the frequency range.
nothing,
Yeah.
right? But it's all encapsulated in this little guy right here in such a way that, when I upgrade my phone, I don't know anything about any of that, but my phone is faster, the battery lasts longer, right? Like all of this research is productized in a way that I'm able to benefit from it without having to understand any of it deeply at all. And so I think there's a real opportunity with generative AI now in education. I don't see any signs that in the near future we're going to change the way we prepare PhDs. That if I'm going to be a PhD in economics or in literature or fine art or no matter what it is, I'm still going to get my PhD without taking a single course about teaching and learning, about how humans learn, about what the research says about how to be an effective instructor. I know there are some really amazing exceptions to that rule in little pockets around the country, but overall, I don't know what the real number is, but I would guess something like 99% of PhDs graduate without a single 3-credit course on how to be an effective instructor and how students learn. But we send them off into the world to do quite a bit of teaching, right?
Mhm.
And so they do their best and they're well-meaning and they work really hard, but we just don't prepare them, right? And I think that's on us as people that run the graduate programs. We don't prepare them to do the job that they're going out to do. But I think there is an opportunity now to productize some of what we know about effective teaching and learning, those evidence-based practices, to embody them in some tools that use generative AI as an engine in the background in a way that without reading that research, without understanding anything about it, you could still interact with a tool that can give you many of those benefits without you needing to kind of stop what you're doing as an economist and go become get a minor in learning sciences or something like that. So that's always been a goal of people in the educational technology space, I would say. We've just never had a tool nearly this powerful as we have with large language models to give us the opportunity to kind of bring that to pass in a way that is going to be really high impact for a lot of people, I think. So that's the thing that excites me the most about it, for sure.
Because there have been intelligent tutoring systems and like chatbot based tutors before, but like you say, this represents a level of technology that really hasn't been seen before.
Yeah, this capability is just qualitatively different,
Mhm.
right? Like we were talking about a couple of minutes ago. The intelligent tutoring, the ITS kind of as a discipline, right? There's decades of research there. They've done a lot of work. They've shown some really impressive results. The thing I would say about the ITS work, for example, and I don't think any of them would disagree, is that that work is so labor intensive and painstaking and just expensive and long. Like, say, to build algebra seems to be the thing that, for whatever reason, the majority of ITSs are built around math. It seems like, and algebra is a very popular subject to build an ITS around. But at the end of years and maybe millions of dollars spent building that, you're not very much closer to building the next one. A lot of what you learned and a lot of what you did in that process is so discipline specific that not a lot of it will transfer. And it's just very kind of artisanal and handcrafted. If you can imagine anything that we would call an intelligent system being kind of handcrafted and very bespoke, it's not. Those systems aren't general purpose systems in the way that large language models are general purpose systems, right? And so there is there's just something very different about the affordances and the capabilities of this current generation of tools from anything we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I can say from my own experience, I'm working with two different groups of computer science students, like two groups of four. Both of them were kind of tasked with the idea of teaching a chapter of intro psych material to a student, walking section by section with, summaries, review questions, that kind of thing. But both teams went about solving that in very different ways. One of the teams decided to do a lot of hard coding, where they're like, we want the summary to be consistent. We want the review questions to be consistent. And so they had like test banks and stuff like that, then a large language model would draw from, but very chapter specific. The other group wanted something flexible that could be applied to any chapter, potentially, to any book, potentially. And so it would have like the large language model provide the summaries of each section. It would have the large language model generate the multiple choice questions. And so that sounds like the ITS route, a lot of hard coding. And like you say, you have to recreate your thing for every chapter versus something that's flexible. That's new. Like we could never have anything like that before.
Yeah. And I spend so much of my time now working. I've been writing for last year and a half about what I call, it's a combination of open educational resources and large language models. And so I call it open educational language models, but in a very uninspired, uncreative way, as names go, maybe. But the idea is, if you think about the technology, the pedagogy, and the disciplinary knowledge, and you think about those as three separate categories of things, what kind of system can you build where you can kind of flexibly mix and match across those different systems? Andy Gibbons, who was a colleague of mine, we served on faculty together at Utah State, and then we served together at Brigham Young, was obsessed with architecture and thought architecture was a really useful metaphor for thinking about building educational systems, educational technology systems. And so when you build a house, there are these layers of the house that are meant to be able to be kind of replaced without really impacting each other. So you've got the electrical system, right? You have the HVAC, you have the structure in terms of the framing, you have the drywall. And to some degree, like you can take the drywall out and put it back in and not affect the other systems, or you can take the electrical out. You can upgrade from Cat 5 to Cat 6 with the wiring that's in the walls. And these different systems, in an ideal world, you could just replace one of them with very minimal impact on each other because the design is very kind of clever about how those layers articulate with each other. And so that's influenced my thinking a lot about the system that I'm working on building, with having ways to capture what are the skills and knowledge of the learning outcomes that you want students to get out of a certain unit, and how much information do you need to provide to the model to make sure that in its responses and its interactions with the system, it's not going to say something that's not true. And so, some method of dealing with goals and content and kind of ground truth, and then a completely separate system of prompts for a wide range of pedagogies. And so maybe in this module, maybe I want to start out with a chapter summary, but maybe then I want to go into an alternative explanations exercise where I tell the system a couple of my hobbies and interests, and then it does the work of kind of generating new examples and explanations using things that I already know about and understand to help me connect new knowledge to prior knowledge, or help me see the connections back into my life. Or maybe what I really want to do is a practice quiz full of open-ended items, right? Just get asked a question and I write a short answer and then I get immediate feedback on that. Or, right, there are lots of different kinds of study patterns that you can implement, and many of them are common in the sense that I could provide you a menu of chapters, and once you pick a chapter, then you could kind of pick from any of those study approaches, and all that information could be brought together into a single prompt that could be fed into the model that could then kick off a conversation with you on a specific topic with enough kind of ground truth to keep it from lying or saying things that are crazy, while adhering to a specific kind of pedagogical form of that interaction. And I'm just fascinated by this. What I keep calling it a textbook, a generative textbook, but I feel like I'm talking about a horseless carriage when I say it that way, trying to talk about the new thing using the language of the old thing. And eventually maybe we'll get around to having a new language that describes the new things. But it's a very different kind of resource in which there's nothing that's hand coded, right? Like you're talking about with that one group of students. It's not about a certain set of questions or a certain set of this or that. It's really generative in every sense. It can generate additional examples. It can generate explanations. It can generate practice. It can generate feedback. And whatever way you prefer to study. And let's just pause. We haven't yet said that learning styles are a myth. And I think in every 1 hour educational podcast, at some point, you have to hate on learning styles. No, they don't exist. It's not a thing. Stop talking about learning styles.
They're in so many different articles, though, and they talk about, the personalized potential of these things, accommodating learning styles. And I think I read that in every introduction section.
You're like, I was with you when you said personalized, and then you said learning styles.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to stop reading your article. Right. So, but it's true that people, while there's not any support to suggest, right, that you can adapt your teaching style to my learning style and have it make a difference in outcomes. It is true that people do have preferences of ways that they enjoy learning more than others. And if I can get the same amount of learning and enjoy it more, let's enable that to happen. If I can build out a little catalog of evidence-based study practices and wire those flexibly together with arbitrary disciplinary content, then it seems like that might be a recipe for some much more effective studying than I think what students generally do today, which is highlight their textbook as they read through it, or highlight the handouts that they get in class, and then they go back and reread the material later on. And maybe like the highest form of study they might engage in is some kind of flashcard-based retrieval practice. But there's just all these other more effective ways of, if you've only got an hour to study for that exam, spend that hour doing something more effective than just rereading your notes. Again, almost anything you could do would be more effective than that. So helping students use that limited time, because it seems like students now are so much more prone to have a job or be caring for a child or be caring for a parent or be caring for a sibling or have a job and be caring, for one of those, and they're trying to fit school in around the margins. The things we can do to support them and helping their time be more effective and increasing the likelihood that they're going to be able to succeed in whatever their educational goals are, it's just super exciting. And just a lot of fun to be alive at this time when there's an opportunity to do that kind of work.
Yeah. We've been really excited about the avatars lately.
Oh,
just like the idea of like speech to speech, like you talking to an avatar on the screen who then gives you an explanation. You're able to interrogate it and ask questions. And I mean, that's cool. That makes you feel like, you're sitting there and listening to a lecture or something like that. You can just put in your headphones and just go. And the thought of having a dialogue with something that is just available, like we've said, 24/7. That's right. I mean, that seems cool.
With the internet, at least recently, right? The difference between the lecture in class and the same lecture with literally nothing done except that lecture recorded and uploaded to YouTube, you'd think there's really no difference there. It's literally the same lecture. Mm-hmm. But the affordance of YouTube is that I can listen to it at midnight instead. I can listen to it at 2 times speed as long as I'm understanding it. When I don't understand, I can stop and go back and listen again, or if the doorbell rings or something else happens and I'm distracted for a minute, a notification goes off on my phone, I'm distracted for a minute. Just that ability to change the speed, to stop and go back and re-listen 2, 3, 4 times, to be able to do it at midnight instead of having to be in the room at 10:30 a.m. 3 days a week. Like, it's exactly the same lecture, but those affordances really make a difference, right? And so now these additional affordances of AI, being able to stop the lecture, which may be the video, or it may be something that the AI is generating just for me based on what it knows about my hobbies and interests, to be able to interrupt it at any point and say, I didn't get that. Explain that again. Give me a different version of that. Being able to go back and listen to the same part of the video over is much more helpful than not being able to do that at all. But if maybe you did hear it the first time, but you didn't understand it. And so hearing the same words again the second time, you didn't understand them the first time, you're not going to understand them now. Being able to just ask for, give me a different example of that. Use Taylor Swift tickets as an example for whatever is on my mind, right? These affordances just push so much further beyond even the internet has pushed, from a lecture that happens in real time, that happens once and disappears and is gone. Actually, a lecture is kind of like a Snapchat, isn't it? It just happens and it disappears and there's no trace of it. And okay, there's something to explore there, maybe another time. But the lecture, and then you record that lecture and put it on YouTube, and now it has the affordances of being digital and being rewindable and things like that. And then you add the ability to ask questions, get answers, get feedback, get new examples, get new explanations, and have that all, like you said, 24/7 as well. It just seems like we're layering, additional power, additional affordances on top of the affordances that have come before, which, if we're trying to, when you have a superpower, you can use it for good or evil, right? The origin story of most villains or heroes, they end up with some superpower and they tip one way or the other.
The twin brothers kind of metaphor.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So, if we decide to use these superpowers for good, I think it's just the most exciting time in history to be a learner. When have you ever had, when you're doing your homework at midnight and you're stuck and you have a question, go ask chat. If you don't like the answer, if you don't understand it, ask it again. Ask it a third time. Ask it to give it to you different. Explain it to me like I'm 5. Like this, I think of if the main contribution of the internet was to overcome time and space as obstacles to educational opportunity, because now I can do it from home, I can do it at midnight, I can do it in my pajamas, I can do it when I'm wherever I am. If the internet was about eliminating time and place as obstacles to educational opportunity, then I think of generative AI as being about eliminating access to expertise as an obstacle. Because now whenever I have a question, when I need an answer, when I need a different this, when I need feedback on my practice, any of those things that it takes, like I just can't go ask my roommate, or I can't call my mom and ask my mom because my mom loves me, would do anything for me, but doesn't have the expertise to help me with my math homework or with whatever it is, right? Now that expertise is available to me all the time. And so we're just, again, just layering. Now time and place are no longer obstacles. Now access to expertise is disappearing as an obstacle. We're not entirely there yet, but we're close. It really feels like I just spend all the time feeling so imagination constrained. Like just knowing there's so much more we could be doing. If I could manage to just pull my blinders back a little further and see a little more of what's possible, I maybe have the same feeling. I don't know, but I just have this sense that the kind of vista of possibilities is just, there's so much of it that I can't take it in. I have a hard time processing all the ways that these affordances could be applied in support of learning. And I feel like my students are learning less. I feel like my students are spending more time to learn less because of my limited imagination,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. And so that's
Yeah.
kind of frustrating.
It's a
But every
challenge,
semester
too.
it gets a little better.
Mhm. Hmm.
I think the power of worked examples is really important here. One of the reasons I love spending time on LinkedIn, and even the AI community on Twitter is actually pretty good. That is the only thing that I will do on Twitter is look at. I've basically unfollowed everybody except people that are working on AI. There's still good conversations around AI happening there. But the reason I spend so much time reading, listening to podcasts, watching videos about AI is just trying to find the next example of something that never would have occurred to me on my own.
Yeah.
That then I can figure out, if I take that in my context, I can repurpose that idea right this way and use it with my students for that purpose. I still think there's just so much. We all need to see so many more worked examples right now.
Well, David, is there anything else? Any last minute thoughts you'd like to touch on?
I feel like we ranged all over. This is, I don't know what I was expecting, but this has been way more fun than whatever I was expecting. So thank you very much for the invitation and for such a fun conversation. I guess maybe the thing I'll say in closing is that I recognize that there are real difficulties ahead of us that are going to be rightly attributable to AI. But man, the possibilities ahead of us, I think, are even greater than the risks are. And I'm just so excited and so optimistic about what's ahead.
Well, amen to that. Well, thank you, David. Good having you
Thank
on.
you. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to PsychSessions AI. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do like, subscribe, or leave a review. All of our episodes, as well as the PsychSessions newsletter, can be found by visiting psychsessions.org. See you next time.